Smith on today. Known each other for over 10 years now. We've caught up quite a lot recently, which has been very nice. And yeah, we've known each other in a business capacity, but started getting to know each other and Tristan a lot more personally through Unbound and the other stuff that we've got going on at the moment, which has been great. And I think it'd be great for us to learn a little bit more about your story and others to hear that as well, John, because you've always got loads of mega insights to share, loads of words of wisdom for us and the other guys within the group and all that type of stuff. So looking forward to digging in a little bit more into your story, John, and hopefully a little bit more in terms of what drives you and your motivation moving forward with business and all the rest of things as well. So should we start off with a little bit of a whistle stop tour in terms of your background? Start from the early days to where we are now with the Accountancy Recruitment Group and a little bit in between.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, whipping through it. So, from working class background in the Northwest. My dad was a mechanic and then worked in a chemical plant. My mum was a beauty therapist. I went to enjoy science at school, went to uni and did molecular biology with genetics, and then came out and found myself working in a lab. And yeah, I think as we've talked about before, really fairly quickly, I had a kind of like one of those like moments of realization where you stood in a lab thinking, I've been stood here on my own for the last 4 days without speaking to another human being in literally a sterile environment, and it just wasn't my bag. And and it's I think it's quite a stark realization for a lot of students and other than perhaps people who've done apprenticeships, where you come to the end of that and a decision you made at 16, 17, 18, and you've got 5, 6 years of sunk cost on, probably isn't where you see the next 20, 30, 40 years playing out. So from there, went into medical sales, and then fairly opportune situation, which like most people, I kind of fell into recruitment. I was offered an interview for a finance recruitment agency in Manchester. I fancied moving to the city. I liked the sound of the role. My brother was an accountant, so I had a little bit of an understanding of what it might look like. And yeah, I was offered that job on a Friday, moved over the weekend, and by the Monday I was living in a flat in Manchester and was working in a recruitment business. And yeah, and I think again, like a lot of people, it's a pretty marmite industry, and for me, it was just kind of water to a duck. I really liked it. I love the environment. I love the connection. I love getting to speak to lots of different businesses on a weekly basis. I love the target nature of it. And I also loved how straightforward it was in terms of meritocracy around how do you get promoted. It's reasonably simple metrics. It's reasonably simple timeframes. So yeah, and so then if you fast forward over the course of the next sort of through a bit of a twisted journey, but fundamentally over the next 10 years, I went from a sort of junior consultant role into consultant senior, managing a small team, managed a division, managed an office, managed multiple offices, and then ultimately became effectively the MD of that business. By which point it was probably a 35, 40 people, multi-million pound GP business. It had gone from privately held to PLC. It had floated on AIM during that time frame as well, which had been a period of change for the group. Yeah, and so that takes us to about 7 years ago, as of last week. And then in 2017, took a step away from the PLC and took that leap of faith to effectively set up and launch on my own. So went solo April 2017. And then the last 7 years on that journey of kind of setting up and growing our own business.
Amazing, quite a journey, and hats off to you for everything that you've built and been through there. So, and happy birthday to the Accountancy Recruitment Group. Amazing.
Thank you.
What was it? What was the driver for you in taking that leap of faith and wanting to jump on and do something on your own?
Yeah, if I'm honest, probably in reality a little bit push and a little bit pull. I think the recruitment industry has been slow to catch the train of understanding that a 75-hour, 80-hour working week is not healthy, over the course of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 20, 30 years. And I worked with a lot of people that you could see that take its toll on them over, Rich, as you say, like you and I have probably known each other for 12, 13 years. And I've worked with some consultants probably on and off for 15 years in total. And you can see that there's that kind of, particularly within a PLC, if I'm honest, where no matter what their best intention, you would often find that the pressure would be on somebody to do a 75-hour, 80-hour working week. And when other things start to pull on their lifestyle, perhaps they get married or they have kids or they get elderly parents and need some more of their support and time. It's very, very hard for them to keep it up. And so you'll naturally see their results slip, which sees them will come under a little bit of additional pressure. And the natural message from the business is maybe you should be working a little bit harder and put a little bit more time at your desk. And so there was a little bit of me kind of probably stopping buying into that. I think I'd started to get to a point in my life where I was maybe starting to geek out a little bit around productivity and modern ways of working and how to get the best out of elite teams and all that type of good stuff. And as I was pulling that thread, alongside that thread, I was probably starting to think, okay, I should have already taken the leap of faith and set up on my own. At that point, my youngest daughter was sort of 2, 3. So there's always that real balancing act that I think a lot of people would experience as well, of like, there's a lot of risk. It wasn't, if you set up a 25, 26, 27 on your own and it goes up in the air, I'm not saying that's not stressful, and I'm not saying that that's not something you need to be mindful of. But if you layer on top of that mortgages and kids so yeah, so it's probably a bit of a push factor, and me kind of thinking, I'm not sure that particularly I've reached a place of happiness in terms of striving to get the MD role, getting into that number one spot. I'm thinking, okay, am I genuinely enjoying my day to day here? And then also the attraction of, wanting to scratch that, just setting up my own and going down that entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because it's something that we spoke about recently and something we chatted about yesterday as well, in terms of I can only assume that John Smith, when he started that recruitment journey, if someone had turned around and said in 7, 8 years you're going to be running this place and you're going to be MD, how are you going to feel about that? The reaction would probably be like, yeah, fucking mega. That's like, I'm going to be really happy. Of course I am. Like, the money, the status, the responsibility, the progression, and everything that's come with it. But you've touched on there that actually, well, I got there, and maybe it wasn't that fucking utopia that you were expecting as well. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and why.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I think it's quite an unsettling thing to have to admit, not necessarily to other people, but to admit to yourself. Because again, if you we've talked about this before, where if you're part of that generation of, particularly, like, I'm 41, and if you come from that generation where there was a message of happiness perhaps lives over there, you'll be happy when some materialistic goal is achieved, you buy that big house or that big car, or in a recruitment sense, we'll be happy when the business reaches 3 million turnover, or we open our 6th office in Birmingham, or we'll be happy when we get to a headcount of X or Y. Or on a personal level, you'll be happy when you get that job, or so on and so forth. And actually, if you go down the rabbit hole of the Mo Gawdat Sold for Happy or the Derren Brown Happy and a Little Bit Happier type books, I think it's now pretty much accepted that that's just not the way forward. Happiness isn't a destination on the end of a train track that you get to, and then when you land there, that's kind of imperpetuity. It's there forever. So I think it's quite a tricky realization. And I think also when you go on that journey, you probably lose sight of what attracted you to that role in the first place. So from a personal point of view, I love working with clients. Like, I love going and speaking to new businesses. If I'm going to meet a private equity backed group and we're talking about their growth journey, or an owner managed business and we're talking about their personal journey and where they want to take the business, they're the days that I come home energized and feeling excited for the next day and getting in partnership with those businesses. That's not to say I also enjoy working with consultants and helping them in terms of developing their own career and their own skill set and all that type of good stuff. But I think you can find yourself in those roles and actually you're looking at, rent and rates and leases on new properties in a city you've never been to. And you just don't get the same, or I didn't get the same level of excitement by any means whatsoever. And you kind of find yourself that you're pulled into a situation that you've strived to, and it's categorically not what you thought it was going to be, and you're not even enjoying the day-to-day tasks. So I think there's an element of realization of that to go, okay, when we set the new business up, I wanted to be very mindful of the strategy of, okay, what do we want from a financial and overarching business strategy? We want to be elite, we want to be best in class, we want clients and candidates to feel a genuine point of differentiation when they work with us. But also, actually, I want me and the people around me and the people who come and work in the business and the clients and candidates who come and support the business to enjoy being part of it as well. And not for us to kind of put that level of enjoyment down somewhere down the track, somewhere at some distant future destination point.
Love that. I mean, the word values is kind of like sort of like has like fluffy connotations almost, especially when it comes to sort of like company values or like the values of doing business, where it's like these like token words on a website. But it sounds like that was like really core for you, of like, why do you want to go on this journey and why do you want to start something on your own? And there's like a real underlying values piece here for you of like a different way of working. What if I'm right in saying that, what is that for you and the Accountancy Recruitment Group? And you've mentioned the people you work with, I guess your team, your clients. What are some of those values?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, 100%. And I think there's two. I think there's two ends to that values equation in recruitment. So one is, in reality, when you start recruitment, for me anyway, the first 12 months, you could pretty much be any business. Like we were, if somebody had rang me, they were an unprofitable, unethical abattoir, in the middle of nowhere, would I have taken that job? Probably. In reality, provided they would have signed some terms and paid us a fee, probably. And I think as you go on your career, you start to lean back from that, and you start to naturally gravitate towards people that have the same values as you, businesses that have similar kind of ethical stance, and that could be, both in terms of what they do and how they operate and how they treat their people, but also in terms of how they treat you and how they see the relationship with you. Do they see value in what you're about and what you're doing, and when you achieve a result, they understand that it's not been a transactional process, but it's actually been, you've wanted to be part of the fabric of the process a little bit more. So I think there's that piece, and I think it's a bit of a first world issue, isn't it? And it's a luxury that comes from starting to have options in terms of who you do and don't work with. And when you sit down on day one in your recruitment career and you don't know a client and you don't know a candidate, you probably don't necessarily have that luxury. But I think as you get further down the line, you do get the opportunity to work with some people that you think, okay, would I go for a beer with this person? Yes. Do I buy into the way they treat their people in their business? Yes. Okay. Do we want to build a long-term relationship and start to build, a better future of working in genuine partnership? Yeah, cool. So I think there's that piece, and that's one thing we really want to do moving forward, particularly. The other values bit, and it's probably loose values, but again, we've talked about loads. It's moving away from that lever of just pulling the hard work ethic every time. And again, I would use, it's not an anti-work hard message, because we're working in an industry where naturally there's time for an 80-hour week, and I don't get this balance right, and I naturally do put a load of time in. But there are others, there are other things to go and look and pull at to make sure that productivity is improved. And often that means leaning back from just being sat at your desk or just being at the end of the phone, and actually investing that time somewhere else. And that could, there are a million things that you and I, all three of us, talk about pretty frequently, that perhaps sound a bit woo-woo, but that we wanted to, again, acknowledge formally in the business, to say, this is some stuff that we're going to recommend to people who join us. This is some stuff that I'll recommend to clients that I'm working with, nutrition, sleep, gratitude, meditation, accountability piece, all of those types of factors that were probably, the example I would always use now, and again, I probably may well have used it with you guys before, where when I worked in a PLC setting, if I'd have said to somebody, I'm going to go for a walk at lunch to try and solve a problem for a client, they probably would have thought that was either going to an interview or that I'd just gone completely crazy, or that I was going for a beer. But if you look at things like Ryan Holiday, I love Stoicism. You look at Ryan Holiday, and he said recently that he wrote "Ego is the Enemy" from a swimming pool, because that was where all of his ideas were formulated. That's where all of the book was effectively written in his head, and it was just a case of getting out and actually putting pen to paper. And I think we want to create a business that gave people the actual space, and not just playing lip service to that stuff, to get themselves to a state where they felt energized and motivated and comfortable turning up to the office without just feeling absolutely gassed because they've just done 5 weeks worth of 80 hours.
Yeah, I love that. There's loads there that I want to touch on, and I'm sure we'll come back to that productivity piece as well, because I know we kind of a lot of the time sing from the same hymn sheet on that as well. But you said something there which is a little bit of a penny drop moment as well for me, because on the values piece, John, as in values are a luxury, and I think that's it's an important thing to bring up, because it's kind of all right, even like Tristan and I banging on about values and only do what you can do, and work with other clients who align with your values. But like values is a hierarchy, isn't it? And it's like, well, my main values are making sure that my family get fucking fed at the end of the day. So ultimately that comes first. Once we've got that sorted, we've got the ripple effect of, okay, well, we're comfortable there. And then as we get more comfortable, we've kind of got that luxury of maybe having more broader values and not taking on certain amount of work or not working with certain clients. And maybe it's just a journey, like a journey that we're striving for as well. So thanks for that, because that's it's been a bit of a penny drop moment. And it sounds so simple as well, but it makes you understand how, yeah, I suppose the more success that you have, or more a little bit of freedom from finance and the rest of it, or the business is a bit more comfortable, that actually you're working towards having that luxury towards more values. So I think that's a really good point. But yeah, I know the productivity thing's something that we all speak about quite a lot. So if we've got someone listening who's, I suppose, going from that old school corporate environment that we've all lived in at some point in our careers, to then ultimately having the free rein to run their own business, which is actually quite a scary place unless you get a few things right. What advice would you give to maybe someone who is, John Smith 7 years ago, starting from scratch again with that freedom?
Yeah, it's good. It's a really good question. I think what I would say is, by nature, most of the people end up in recruitment actually and stay the course in recruitment, but definitely most of the people that end up then going on a journey of setting up their own, by nature, they tend to be relatively full force. And they tend to have quite an extreme personality, like type A personality type. And what I've seen in myself and the other people around me will be, if they're doing something, they're doing it at 100%, almost forsaking everything else. And it's probably a superpower and kryptonite in equal measure. Because, and again, I've talked to you before about, if I go and I took up boxing, and I would come out of the box gym 9 times out of 10 with sick on myself, which is unusual, isn't it? Because it's just overtraining and overexerting yourself. When I did a fast, I did it fairly quickly. Instead of doing 16 hours, I did a 72-hour fast and ended up in bed with keto flu, and my missus having to come and bring me fluids. And I think that's quite normal, and then it'll translate into work, that if I'm doing it, and I'm probably will easily fall into the habit of staying there till late 9 o'clock at night until the lights have gone out. And so I would say to anybody doing that if you are that mindset and you recognize any of those things and that resonates, is you've got to be ultra disciplined, perversely disciplined, at making sure that you don't just slip back into that habit, because it will definitely undermine your decision-making capacity, and it will definitely ultimately lead to worse performance. It's a really backward metric. So I would say you need to be somehow mindful of some scaffold that exists in your life or in your business to make sure that you don't just go down the rabbit hole of pulling the work harder lever, because it's old thinking. And it's probably ingrained in you, and it's probably been perpetrated by the industry you've been in for the last X amount of years. And it's really hard to get away from. And I think it's about then going, well, okay, if I'm going to pull back from that, if we are having naturally a tough week, or you're on the bottom end of the roller coaster of recruitment, which other levers do we look to access? If we're not going to necessarily just go, well, I'll just do 90 hours instead of 75.
Yeah.
And then being very clear and rigid around, this is how I'm going to react to that week. These are levers I'm going to pull. This is who I'm going to share them with. And again, it sounds like it's not an anti-work hard message. Like, as I say, there are times when, to use a boxing analogy, you're going to be in 12-week camp. And that's super cool. There are times when it's time to get down and get gritty with it. And I'm absolutely comfortable with that. But it's being really cautious of, have you recognized you're in it? Do the people around you know you're in a 12-week camp? Do they know why you're in a 12-week camp? And super importantly, do we know when it's done and what happens when it's done, to celebrate the success of the effort and achievement, but also to make sure that you don't just do 5 on the bounce by accident and then end up getting to the end of the year absolutely thoroughly exhausted. Because I think that's where burnout potentially lives.
I'm interested to know about Mrs. Smith. Is she like the counterbalance for you there, where you've got these moments where you like want to push things to the limit, or is she on this journey with you and has a similar mentality? How is that dynamic?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a good question. She'll love that question. So no, Sarah Sarah's probably naturally a much more balanced person than me by nature. So she's probably much more mindful of like, and maybe this isn't gender specific, but so I've got two daughters, and I would say when, and it's a convoluted answer to the same question is, so when if I look back to kind of growing up and you look at like my dad and my uncles, and they were mega and I love them all and they're all awesome, but they came from a generation where if you talked about self-development or personal development or self-help or deep work is the new terminology, isn't it, that people want to call it, like they would have thought that was probably pretty pretentious. Again, a little bit of a luxury probably.
Yeah.
And they probably would have took the piss in reality if I'd have been mentioning that or my mates had been mentioning that. And so I know, and I think that clings to your ego, like that's hard to get rid of. And so I think when you start to get through into your sort of late 20s, early 30s, and some of this stuff starts to come onto the radar, I think there is a little bit of a barrier to access, particularly for men, in my opinion, of our generation or my generation. So going back to Sarah, I think Sarah probably caught that ball sooner than me. She's probably more aware of introducing balance into our family life, introducing balance into their kids' lives, and probably starting to encourage me to do that. And that's not to say that that comes at the behest of ambition or anything like that, because it doesn't. I think paradoxically the opposite. So Sarah's embarking on a new career at the moment. So she's transitioning out of, did a 4-year medical degree, spent 10 years in the NHS, and wants to go and pursue her creative space, which is her happy place. And that's the journey she's on. And that's taken a lot of kind of soul searching, and it takes a lot of planning and making sure there's infrastructure and taking the right steps and being proactive and all that type of good stuff. But what she probably won't do is throw herself at that at the detriment to everything else falling off the rails, where I'd be much more likely to just be like, right, hash that, burn that, let's go and do that tomorrow. So yeah, she's amazing for that. It's just way more balanced and way more further down that curve than me, I would say.
I can really resonate with that. It's very similar in my relationship, where sometimes, I mean, it really does feel counterintuitive sometimes, doesn't it, to this mentality of like slowing down to speed up, where actually like if the game is that we're mental athletes that are seeking high performance, we almost have to have that mentality like an athlete does, of like, I train really fucking hard and perform at my best, but then also give myself the capacity and energy and focus to then go again by actually like valuing the other stuff. I mean, you kind of touched on some of that, what that looks like for you, John, in terms of some of like the personal development, the recovery stuff. Could you able to expand on what are some of like the tools and the techniques that you use for this like high performance mindset that you've clearly got?
Yeah, definitely. I think, when you like, success leaves clues, doesn't it? And it's such a cliche, but when you start to read some literature around it and you look at kind of what people are doing, and it's that whole piece of kind of filling every bucket. So, if I look back to kind of my first 4 or 5 years in recruitment, well, what would give? Well, going for a run or going to the gym would naturally give. Like if I had a candidate to interview at 7 o'clock and I planned to go to the gym, guess what? I'd interview the candidate and the gym would get put on hold for tomorrow. If you look at some of the more modern things like, hot and cold therapy, journaling, gratitude, meditation, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it, walks in nature, getting your steps, being really mindful of my sleep routines, the amount of sleep I'm getting, and make sure that I go to sleep on time at the same time every day. All of I think independently, all of those things are probably a smaller lever and a less immediately impactful lever than just putting an extra couple of hours in. But if you look at a James Clear Atomic Habits, it's not a big glamorous single step, is it, that ultimately leads to these super results. It's doing the same routine, grind out, small marginal gain habits over a 2, 3, 4, 5 year period, and then suddenly getting to the end of it and realizing that they've compounded themselves into mega results. And you can also do them for another 5 years because you've not done it again at the detriment to everything else. So yes, I would say it's probably all those little bits and bobs, all of those little natural factors that you kind of go, okay, there's a little bit of a gain there. And again, it's not for everybody, and it sounds a bit woo-woo, but I think the frustration for me amongst some of my mates is, and I've told them this, is that there seems to be this kind of ego barrier to entry. And it's kind of look, if you just run your own personal experiment, as simple as take yourself to bed on time and try and get you 7, 8 hours or whatever it's going to be. Don't binge watch the last Netflix, or don't, give yourself a digital detox and get off your phone for the last hour. Actually, those things, when you do them for a 3, 4, 5, 6 month period, people around you will start to tell you that they're seeing some gains. And it's way better for clients. Like I've talked about this a lot, where I work with a lot of consultants where over 10 years they would do a cracking job for client X, and client X would really buy into them, and they get a really good understanding of each other's businesses, and they would get a lot of trust. But in the background, that consultant's been working 75 hours a week, and they're ruined, like they're knackered. They're not there, they might be there in body, they're not there in mind or spirit. And so by the time the client really needs their help a decade later, they've just not got the legs left in the tank, because the business hasn't encouraged them or given the time and freedom to invest in themselves to get themselves to a point where they can carry on doing that for another 10 years. So I think, ironically, it's really good for business.
Yeah, but yeah, we're definitely singing from the same hymn sheet there, mate. And yeah, I mean, you said about this, like the values here around sort of like valuing the rest recovery, high performance, that this is something that you've like been really passionate about in your business. And how has that been sort of like sharing and encouraging and working on working with these values with your team and with clients? Has that always been kind of like an open door? Is that like a challenge? How's that been for you?
Yeah, it's good from a team perspective. It's just an obvious instant positivity you can see on a day-to-day basis. Like, categorically, if somebody who worked in the office with me will have no issues in just getting up and going for a walk. And there's no, businesses can say that they're great at doing that, and then you'll get a side eye. And it's something as small as that that creates that little barrier to go, like, actually, I'm going to go and take myself a walk to get some headspace. So there just isn't that in our business. And I think from a client perspective, it's cool. Like, increasingly, once you start to talk about it, guess what? Other people want to talk to you about it too. And it becomes less of a taboo, which again, I would say amongst my generation and sort of the generation between probably me and my dad's generation, he's just turned 70. Actually, people are more interested in it than you think. And it's kind of how do you start the conversation. I recently talked about, I'm a huge fan of ice baths. Tristan, you and I have talked about this before. And it's been a bit of a game changer for me. And I can't remember anybody ever really bringing the topic up with me. But interestingly, since I've sort of brought it to the table, the amount of people that I've had a conversation with about it, and the number of conversations it's then subsequently facilitated around other types of stuff is incredible. So it's been a really positive in that respect. Just having a different conversation with the client, aren't you? And invariably, it's a conversation that probably is a bit more personal, and the two of you are having a bit more of a non-work conversation, which is really positive. I think it brings us around to accountability. Like, you and I are huge fans of this, and again, that's one area that I'm a complete geek on, and I hugely buy into.
Yeah, we'll get onto the accountability bit as well, because it's we've all discussed it quite a lot. We're all in a group keeping each other accountable, and obviously you play a major part in that. So I'd like to get onto that, but I think it's interesting that before we get onto that is the conversations with other people about this stuff who potentially you might not deem to be into that type of stuff, but also the influence on that as well. Like, John, we've discussed before in terms of, and you've mentioned it briefly here, in terms of being brought up by that baby boomer generation, working class generation, having an old man that'd probably take the piss out of you for bringing some of this stuff up and calling you a soft lad and all the rest of it. But like, and we've discussed it in the past, like I've mentioned some of this stuff to my dad. It's a very long journey, and he's building a sauna at home and started getting into the cold showers and stuff. And it's like, fucking hell, like even these guys are coming around to it and seeing the positive impact it's having on their life as well. So it's an interesting conversation, and it seems a little bit backwards, doesn't it, that it's getting to that older generation now as well. But I think you always summarize it really well in terms of that slow down to speed up. Like, it's not about, oh, well, yeah, we're doing this because I don't know, we're entitled to take care of ourselves a little bit more and all the rest of it. It's that actually we want to fucking perform better and get more, sometimes by not always doing more as well. And it's about that working smart sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting, like it's an interesting topic around sort of retirement as well, isn't it? Because I'm probably getting to that age now where retirement feels like a mile off, but it's probably time to start thinking about it and having the conversation. Actually, some of my mates are maybe sort of 10 years further down the track. And it's that whole piece of happiness not being a destination. And I think so many people perhaps work toward the goal of retirement and get there. And then that old adage where it's kind of like, well, they almost sort of have a period of depression instantly as they retire, and they get away from the job that they think they've hated, get away from it, and then start to feel a little bit unnerved by the whole situation. And so I think maybe that generation of people is perhaps getting a bit better at catching the ball, going, okay, well, what sorts of daily habits have I got around that sort of well-being piece to make sure that, okay, if you climb off the hamster wheel of going to work and getting up at 9 to 5 and perhaps having purpose in inverted commas, what lives there, what lives in that space. So yes, and make like this is the thing, like when you work in the recruitment industry, I think recruitment isn't great at starting to, you know, I can't ever remember, well, nobody ever did have a conversation in 10 years with me about, have you thought your productivity might be improved by X? And I think there's some really interesting stuff if you're interested, go into the Cal Newport podcast area. He's a productivity expert from the States. I think he works at MIT or Massachusetts Uni or something like that. And I think he's a computer programmer. But it's that whole, what do we measure productivity using? And we tend to use, we're in knowledge generation, aren't we? We tend to be paid for solving problems by sort of using our brains. We might be working on multiple projects at once. And we kind of use the productivity kind of yardstick that's being used for people that were making pins and needles in like the 1940s, where it's what time did they get in, how many did they do, did they look busy all day? And I think we're probably getting to a point where we're kind of looking at it going like, that doesn't really work. And the more you press that button, eventually kind of the worse results that come out of the back of the program.
Yeah, it's like that clocking in, clocking out mentality, isn't it? And just like tracking hours. And a lot of and you won't be surprised, a lot of stuff that you're saying is obviously really resonating. Like I remember having a flexi hour in my corporate job, but because you didn't take a lunch break, you were literally on the phones during your lunch or grabbing a quick sandwich or whatever. But if you took that flexi hour, it was like you got the piss taken out of you. Ooh, so and so's had his flexi hour. Do you know what I mean? And it's like you're talking about, well, no, actually, maybe we're going for a bit of a walk and clearing the head. You're going to solve problems better and be a better form this afternoon. Now it seems like fucking common sense. But I remember like going on a stag do and just being like, I need to take my flexi hour to get my haircut. And it was just like, went on the stag do and it's like, I hadn't had my haircut in about 6 weeks because I felt bad about taking this flexi hour that was actually there to, I suppose, from headquarters and head office and HR to say everyone needs a flexi hour. But actually at regional level, it was like, you were shunned. Do you know what I mean? You were wonder if you got your job back when you came back from it. Well, I don't know because I never actually took it. So loads of this really resonates, and it seems a bit batshit crazy looking back now. And with what we know, and I think we're lucky with maybe the media as well, like this with podcasts and some of the guys that you've mentioned, that this is becoming a bit more common as well in terms of understanding that. I'm going to chuck a couple of things at you here, John, because I know you're passionate about both, and I'm sure you've got some thoughts on it. And you've mentioned one of them earlier as well. Like the first one's accountability, and I want to speak about that and the importance of that. And then the second thing, which probably links into it, but links into all the other stuff as well, is like reps and consistency. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about maybe those two things and how they overlap as well.
Yeah, definitely. But just as a last aside as well on that unravel about what people used to celebrate. I remember I'd been in recruitment probably 2 or 3 years and I'd been promoted, and the MD was lauding it to somebody else to say that that's something you should strive to do. And he'd made the comment saying, and we used to get 20 days holiday a year plus bank, and I'd not used them. So I'd rolled over like 5 holidays. And they were kind of celebrating the fact that going like, you worked so hard, he didn't even take his holidays. And you look back and think, that is so wrong in every respect, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of celebrating the fact that I'm clearly probably really gassed out. Whereas I think now there's just much more of a collective understanding that actually taking those holidays is good for business. But yeah, no, on the accountability piece, and the two things come together, don't they? So on the accountability piece, I'm just a huge advocate for it. So for people who haven't done it in its basic term, you're probably we do it on a WhatsApp group. So part of a 6, 7, 8, 9 people on a WhatsApp group. In the morning, you would post your 4 or 5 key non-negotiable, no excuses, things you're going to do that day. And that could be a mix of work-related tasks, whatever it could be. You know, have a difficult conversation with X, eat the frog, go to the gym, do your 10,000 steps, fill in a gratitude journal, and, you know, book a spa day for your best mate's birthday. Whatever those 5 things are going to be. And then it's an evening check-in to say, done, 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 not done, done. And then rinse, repeat over the course of however long you're going to do it for. And if you look at the there's so much peer-reviewed data, particularly from the States and like the University of California. It was recently in Forbes magazine that it seems to be that on a whole host of accredited data sets that you're somewhere between 95 and 50% more likely to do the task just purely by doing that one single thing alone. And nobody ever talking about it. It could be complete strangers in that group. There's a psychological program that seems to play out that just means that you'll have accountability to get those things done. So I think there's a net gain of 100% on that, because it's such a small thing to do for such good retro reward. And then I just think there's a million other things you can unpick from it that just can't help but being positive. Things like, at the very least, at the beginning of the day, you're taking some time out to say, okay, what actually are my priorities for the day? I think the second huge thing is, to use a James Clear, you're casting a vote for yourself as being somebody that does the things you say you're going to do. And I think there's huge weighted value in that. Again, if you geek out on it, there's evolutionary advantage to that. You know, if you're somebody who can be relied upon to be somebody who does the things they say they're going to do, who doesn't want to hang around with that person? Because that's a useful person in the tribe. It's very unsettling to be the opposite of that, because that leads to lack of trust and it undermines your perception and all that type of good stuff. And then I guess behind all of that is, if you do that consistently for 5 things a day for 12 months, it gives you 2,000 pieces of individual data. And that's around, I set off to do that. Did I or didn't I achieve it in a 24-hour window? And then again, if you can deep dive and drill into that, you're looking at things like either, yes, I did it, and this was the result from it. Great, carry on. I didn't do it. Well, why didn't we do it? Well, either I had no intention of doing it. I never ever do it. I don't need to do it. Okay, we'll just strip it out. Stop giving it airtime, stop giving it brain space, or something else always gets ahead of it. And then you can drill into, okay, well, why is that getting ahead of it? Are there structures you can put behind it to say it needs to take higher priority? So for example, if you've got a blind spot and every day you put, I'm going to go to the gym, and for 3 days on the bounce you don't go, are you not going because you don't value it? Okay, revisit your whys on it. Are you not going because you've not got time? But what's getting in front of it? Or are you not going because it's a part of the day that it just doesn't quite kind of clashes with other stuff? So if you put the gym at 3 o'clock and it's school run day, it's a flawed plan from the start. But unless you give it that reflection, it can become a really obvious blind spot where you're like, I was never really going to go because I had the school run on a Tuesday. So, okay, next Tuesday, you've got to remind what you get up and you go to the gym, or the gym drops off your to-do list that day and that's a rest day and we go again. So I just think it's super, super useful, and it's such a small thing. And like everything, it's just such an incremental game where it's like everything, it's dead easy to do, but dead easy to leave alone and forget. And I think the real secret sauce and the magic is if you do it really religiously. Like gratitude is the one that I always use as the example. If you capture 3 things on a daily basis that you're grateful for, again, sounds a bit woo-woo. Over the course of doing that for 12 months, you're actually, I was talking to Sam, neuroscientist, yesterday. You're changing the programming in your brain, you're changing neural pathways, you're starting to recognize positives, you're starting to become more optimistic, you're starting to be a more positive person. And guess what? Like, those people interact with each other, those people attract each other. And that's where businesses are born from. That's where huge growth is born from, both personal and commercial, and. From as simple as, if you wind that all the way back to, that's the simplest point, 5 things in a WhatsApp group in the morning at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, which seems so simple, doesn't it? And you can see why people check out, because there isn't that instant gratification on any of this stuff. Like, there's probably not that much instant gratification on, going to the gym. Like, it's those reps over time. And Sam, who you mentioned, he was a great guy to speak about it, because he's got a master's in neuroscience and the rest of it. He put it in a really simple to understand analogy once, in terms of, what you're saying is right, Rich, but it's like, let's say you go down a ski slope once and you take the exact same route, like, you'll make a little bit of a dent in the snow. But if you did it 200 times, you've literally just built your own fucking wedges. And he says that's what your brain's like. You're just hardwiring it. The first one's not going to make much of a difference, but do it time and time and time again until it becomes autopilot, doesn't it? So I think, but ultimately, if you stop skiing there, eventually that snow is going to start filling it back up, and you're going to, old habits die hard and all the rest of it as well. So yeah, I love that, and I think we're all quite aligned on that in terms of where we're at. I've said this to you before, John, and I'm the way you are, you don't particularly, I suppose, in terms of the praise and all the rest of it, but I think you've got a real knack for making people take action. Whether that's former employees that used to work with you on the arcade journey, or even more recently, in the accountability groups with an Unbound and all that type of stuff. I mentioned to you earlier, like, and Perks, who won't mind me mentioning it, it's like, yeah, I'm going to do this because, yeah, I committed to John I'm doing this because John had asked the right questions earlier in the week and stuff like that. So I'm going to ask you the question that I've asked you before, like, where have you learned that skill from, or what would you credit that to anyway?
Yeah, and I've probably given you the same answer before. I don't think that's I don't think that's me getting Perks to do something. What I think it is, it's just is understanding how people develop habits. And over the last like 15, 16 years in recruitment, it's quite interesting to see people how they pick up habits, and interestingly how they let them go. Because I think as with everything, like I say, it's the small incremental bits and bobs that you do over time that make the giant differences. It isn't, nobody in our industry is likely to come up with something that's completely revolutionary, you know, mind-bogglingly innovative, because it's kind of being done. Like, it's a relatively straightforward business. It's a relatively straightforward way of working.
Yeah.
So what differentiates between absolute amazing, what differentiates £1 million biller from £100,000 biller? Often not a lot. It's just the tiny little habits that they've adopted and that they keep on with. So I guess as you work through the management structures of that, you probably do pick up some ability to kind of go, okay, we need to catch when you start to drop that habit and quickly stack it back in again.
Yeah.
And then it's back to, that's not me doing that, that's Perks, isn't it? But what it's probably noticing is, if Perks is committed on a Monday to say, guys, can you keep me straight this week on doing my 10,000 steps? He's just making a little mental or physical note to myself to say, on the day when inevitably one day this week, something will come up where, if Perks is just naturally going to do that, I'm just using an example, I think he'd be cool with it as well.
Yeah.
If he's naturally knows he's going to do that himself, he probably wouldn't ask for some sort of support around making sure that he's straight on it. So by virtue of asking, that will probably trigger to me to go, he'll probably drop the ball on that in some way, shape, or form this week. And at that point, it's just being behind it, isn't it? Just going like, just flicking that back onto his periphery vision again.
Yeah.
And it's a million versions of that, isn't it? It's just putting it back front and center, because ultimately he's got to do the reps. And he also won't want me going like Sergeant Major him, because it's none of my business whether he does them or not.
Yeah, there's something in opting in for this, isn't there? It's like, imagine doing this for someone who hasn't opted into it. It's like, even as part of Unbound, we've learned that journey. Like at one point, we're like, everyone in an accountability group, and it's like, it was just a fucking nightmare. But then when we switched it to, right, you can opt in and you can opt out as well. If you're in, you can opt out. There's something different about it. But then when you've got 7 or 8 people who are opted in and who've all got each other's back and care enough to call each other out, I think that's where those little groups can become quite special as well. And there's some stuff you mentioned earlier as well, in terms of like, none of this stuff is fucking rocket science, but I think we both agree that. And I like the way of like, it's all simple stuff, and sometimes it's too simple, isn't it? That's why sometimes some of this stuff gets laughed off, as in, what, you're posting your stuff early in the morning, or you're having a cold dip, or you're going for a walk, nice one, fucking, you're a trailblazer. But for me, and I'm sure you probably agree, John, with the chats that we've had, it's like, yeah, it's simple, but there's a big fucking difference between simple and easy, particularly doing it time and time and time again. Does that resonate?
100%. And it's the whole like pushing the smallest domino mentality, isn't it? Where and it works both ways. So for example, if you've got a mate that you've committed, you're gonna have a week where you're not gonna have a beer, for example, and one of the two says, shall we just go for that beer? It only almost takes the conversation piece to push the first domino, and 25 minutes later you're on your second beer, aren't you? Yeah. Versus this slight pushback of going like, let's go and have a game of squash. It's that, and as James Clear says, it's not the first mistake that's fatal, is it? It's the second one. And it's letting it tip the next domino, so stepping out the door and going in the pub, or stepping out the door in your trainers and going to a squash court. Yeah. And I think those accountability groups are amazing for actually going like, I did drop the ball on that. Well, okay, look, what preceded dropping the ball and not going to the gym? Well, it was, I'd had a really stressful day. Well, what was your coping strategy for the stressful day? Well, I opened a bottle of wine. Well, you're definitely not going to go. The minute you took the wine out of the fridge, you weren't going to the gym.
Yeah.
And it's just catching that. And so that's why I think it's so positive, because I think it just gives you the data set and the time and reflection. And you're talking about 10 minutes, you're probably talking about 15 minutes maximum in a day.
Yeah.
But 365 days later, and you get the dopamine hit of then the results coming through, then it's quite addictive. Then you've set, to use your analogy, you've set the roadmap of the skis through the snow. It's so much easier then to just carry on with it because it becomes embedded.
Mm.
So I think for me, like running a business is almost like quite glamorized. Like maybe it's like TV shows like The Apprentice or films about Facebook. It's almost like glamorized of like what it's like running a business. But I think for me, when you're in it, actually, like that's not the reality of it. And you could almost get that perception of that's what it's like from social media as well, that everybody's absolutely flying. So I think quite a lot of running a business, it's like a mindset game of like actually doing the things and being part of an accountability group with people like you, John, that don't only just do what they say they're going to do for themselves and show up, but also like care about other people in the group and the results that they get. Fucking hell, for me, that just makes running a business a hell of a lot easier. I mean, in terms of your journey, we've talked quite a lot about sort of like the things that you've done to get to a really successful place in your business. What have been some of the challenges that you've come across, and yeah, how have you overcome them?
Yeah, definitely. So we've probably done that kind of balance challenge to death, haven't we? Where I find that I am prone to falling in and out of that, of kind of just going too far. So that's one that I always am mindful of. I think loneliness is one that's really key one for business owners to think about and talk about. Again, if I unravel to unwind back to being a sales rep, I think one of the things I absolutely hated about that was kind of driving up the M6 and you'd gone and done a big deal and sold a piece of, DNA extraction robots was what I was selling at the time. They're probably 100 grand a piece. So when you sold on it, it was a chunky bit of work for the business and they were buzzing. So you'd kind of ring head office in Nottingham and tell them and they'd be great. And then you were kind of sat in the car like, right, okay, that's high five. And I found it then, and that's probably been winding back to being like 22, 23. And I think you notice that again when you fly solo, because naturally when you come out of a more corporate environment or a bigger established business, and it's you plus another, or particularly if you're bootstrapping it and you've not gone on a fundraising mission, and it is you and maybe one other, and then it's you plus two others and you plus three others, it can be quite an isolating environment. One, to be able to deal with some of the things that are tough when you've had a difficult day and something's fallen out of bed, or something that hasn't quite gone to plan. But equally, when you've achieved and you've hit a goal, and it's like, well, and what?
Mm.
And I think it's important to be able to take stock and go and share that with somebody, and whether that's somebody who also owns a business or whether it's a community or a network, the likes of an Unbound. I think you need to put some scaffolding structure and discipline around that, just to guard yourself and put some space between you and the business, perhaps. Some of the day-to-day challenges are the challenges, aren't they? Like getting used to probably wearing all the hats again. And again, I would probably recommend to people that are right at the beginning of that journey to think about what's getting kept in-house and what you're going to outsource. Because there are certain admin tasks that you can just get away from your desk, get them away from your desk, because that's not time well spent, or headspace well spent. Some really standard ones like cash is king, isn't it? Recruitment in particular is rammed out with vanity metrics of how many offers you got, how many people have you got, and a lot of business owners will go and stroke each other's egos by talking about that type of stuff. And then for me, fundamentally, it doesn't really matter. It's, are you enjoying it? Are you going in the direction you said you were going to? Are you sticking to your values? And is there money in the bank? Because that's what's going to keep it alive down the stretch. That's what's going to be keeping it at your desk for 10, 20, 30 years. So yeah, I guess they would be the things. Just having part of the plan of working back from the vision and then reverse engineering the journey, rather than just running at it full force and then finding yourself in a situation where you recreated the golden prison that you just left. Because then trying to unravel that is almost impossible.
Mm. Love that. In terms of starting a business, actually, I'm going to reframe this question. We've got someone in a corporate environment, so maybe a recruitment manager, billing manager, and you've been there in that environment, and the potentially the environment, the leadership is maybe still running things the old way, and they've got that itch. They've got that itch to go on their own. What advice would you give those guys?
Yeah, so very few people won't have that itch, will they? Especially in recruitment, because by nature it's an environment that attracts entrepreneurial people.
Yeah.
It's sold as a run your own business within a business type of model. So I think everybody at some point probably has that feeling. One, I would say go and sit on it. You know, going slow to go fast is a good plan. I absolutely hate the rise of kind of the top 30 under 30. I saw one recently at top 25 under 25, and it's kind of like there's such emphasis on people to do it fast.
Yeah.
And like almost like the game has gone by 40. Like, but when I would say sit on it, the reason I say sit on it is I think sometimes people can think that's what I want to do. And in reality, it isn't for everybody. It's hard work, it's isolating. It can be less fun than you anticipate it's going to be. And it isn't as glamorous as you said, Tristan, sometimes as you think it's going to be. If they've sat on it for a bit and they've gone and got sensible advice from people that have been on that journey, perhaps go and get advice from people who haven't been on the journey, because there is an alternative. Like, again, it's not an anti-climb the PLC ladder. Like, that's a good plan. Go and gather all that information would be my first bit of advice. If they come out of that, and however long that takes, and think, no, it definitely is my plan, I want to go and be part of a journey that X has had, then I think it's about being very, very clear around the visualization of what's the next 10 years. And repeating that point is work back from, do you want to have a recruitment business in 10 years' time that's got 16 offices, that's UK wide? Do you want to have a recruitment business that's got an international piece and you're going to go and spend 6 months a year in America? Or do you want a recruitment business that's 10 of you sat in an office that's close to your house, that drives an exceptional service into the clients that it deals with and has some super billers in it? And then, with some support and coaching, probably structure a plan back and then make the milestones and make the steps towards that. And that sounds like common sense, but I think it's what's a lot easier to do is tell your boss to go and give himself an enema with your current notice. And then you come out of that, you've had a row, burnt your bridge, fine. And then it's like, right, okay, now what? And then you sort of find yourself sat in an office, and then it's kind of scrabbling around, and it's are we, aren't we? And all of those dilemmas are a waste of time and headspace. Whereas I think if you can get a really clear plan from the outset, it won't go to plan, but at least you've set the compass to the right direction. Because I think what is way more depressing is going off on a journey and creating something that was someone else's vision.
Yeah. I think that'll resonate with you, Tristan, certainly from some of the chats we were having yesterday with us all, but basically. But you see it so often, don't you? It's like, I'm going to do my own thing. So I'm going to do things so differently, and it's going to be different to where I was before. And then all of a sudden you get to the fucking grind and you see people just getting caught in that trap and not realizing it for like fucking 5 years, and like, oh shit, I've just looked up and this isn't kind of where I want to be. So a little bit of I think it all comes back to being conscious, does it? Like, we all talk about it quite a lot, don't we, in terms of like being in autopilot or being out of autopilot. And even as simple as what we've talked about and what us guys do together and the rest of the guys at that daily check-in, it's just a little bit of consciousness in the morning, a little bit of consciousness every day. Let's review the week. Let's plan the week. Just a little bit of consciousness. And it's like, so many people are like, well, why do you fucking bother doing that? It's like, even some of my mates who have got businesses, why do you bother doing that? You know what you're doing on Monday morning?
Yeah.
Well, I do, but it's reactive and it could always be better. And there's probably some lessons from last week as well. So I think that's absolutely solid advice, John, as expected as well. So touch on a little bit from yesterday then. So Tristan did a mega session for those who weren't there on visualizing a 10-year vision. Got us pretty deep with the old breath work and the rest of it to do it with some clarity as well. What's on your sat nav, John?
Yeah, no, session yesterday was really interesting. I was laughing about some of the people that got tears in their eyes, I think, yesterday after the breath work. But yeah, no, so I think for us, like more of the same in terms of the accounting recruitment group is grow ARG, but in a, as we've talked about, in a way that we feel comfortable with working with businesses that we want to work with and that value what we do and that we think have good values. I mean, as you know, I'm involved in some other stuff like property investment. We've got a property investment company, and I'd like to continue to do that. Probably exploring doing that overseas a little bit more so. And then for Sarah and I and the kids, in 10 years' time, our youngest, my youngest daughter Betty will be 20. So it's just then about sort of helping them pave their way, and then hopefully from a personal perspective, probably spending a little bit more time overseas. Whether that's living overseas or just getting some more frequent adventures over there. Yeah, that's part of our plan. So a lot of more of the same, which is quite a boring answer, isn't it? But I think reasonably comfortable where the tracks are at the minute and where we're heading. So
that's it. I think it's about that clarity, isn't it? When you go overseas, are you going to start wearing a cap backwards like Tristan, like Chris was saying yesterday?
Categorically, yes.
I think you can pull it off, mate.
But
So I think if you're consciously making these decisions and you're on that path of like more of the same, I think that's a really good indication that these big changes that you've made 7 years ago, like they must have all been for the positive, and you must be in a good place.
yeah, and it's like it's constant work in progress, isn't it? And a lot of this stuff that I'm saying, I'm kind of reminding myself most of the time. But it is, isn't it? Because it's never. I don't think it's ever a solved equation. I think it's always ebbing and flowing in one direction or the other. So
it made me laugh because it's like sometimes people message me on LinkedIn and say, "That's a great post." That I was like, I was only just fucking speaking to myself, mate.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? And it's just an infinite game, isn't it? And it's getting those skis a little bit deeper along the way, and hopefully it all comes a little bit easier. And having the humility to admit that, I think, is massive as well. But yeah. A little bit in terms of selfish questions then. So you've been in and around Unbound for a little bit now, and Tristan and I both agree, obviously you're a key part of it, and we're very appreciative of that. So we'll start with the question that we've discussed before as well, like who is it not for is probably a more of an interesting question than who is it for?
Yeah, and it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's for a lot of people. It's like for people who don't know it, it's an opportunity for small business owners and people who are in rapid growth businesses to kind of be part of a community of people that are on the same journey, in different sectors or whatever it may be, but kind of sharing their wins and challenges and all that type of good stuff. So it's for a lot of people who are in that space. Who's it not for? It's probably not for people that are too close-minded. So it's a modern group. So all of these types of things in terms of the other levers that you can pull and breath work and ice work and mindfulness and meditation and gratitude and accountability and all those types of things will be on the table, I would imagine, at pretty much every juncture. So if that's absolutely not your bag and that's making you feel like it's an uncomfortable sort of scratchy jumper, then well, I'd argue you probably should go to that, but maybe not. Maybe it's not for you long term. It's not corporate by nature. I don't think the presentations are corporate. So I think again, if you love that very pinstripe corporate type model, then I would say maybe not. And I suppose an element, it's probably not for the faint-hearted, or because it will put you out of your comfort zone, won't it? Being part of something like an Unbound, it probably will naturally by nature deliberately expose you to stuff that you maybe don't necessarily want to do. And so if that's really not your bag and you just think like I'm going to walk into that room and feel like a fish out of water, well, should you not go? You probably should go more than anybody else. But yeah, I guess if you genuinely are that delicate flower, then maybe not.
It's timing, I think, isn't it? And it's obviously where people are on their journey. You've got to meet people where they are as well. But yeah, absolutely love all that, John, and really appreciate it as well. And it always makes me, like, a lot of people do join Unbound first and foremost to sort the sales and marketing strategy out and make more money. So it does worry me as well when, so even yesterday, for instance, when a few of the new guys are there, and it's like, that's the first thing we're working on is the sales and marketing, which is right, because we need money to do all the great stuff we want to do and have the luxury, the values that we were talking about earlier on and all the rest of it. So I'm kind of always got one eye open thinking, how's this going down with those guys? Were they expecting to be sat here like this? And it was a bit like, put it on LinkedIn earlier, like, started off with Oasis fucking in the bushes on full pelt, and then next minute it's like a fucking hippie retreat. Thinking some people must be thinking, what's going on here? So there you go. We're probably putting a load of people off, but maybe putting the right people off at the same time. So appreciate the honesty and the kudos on that.
Yeah,
but
I think British Aerospace are in the room next door thinking like, what on earth is going on in there?
A couple of them walked in the morning, was like, gave the name or whatever, like Jimmy White. It's like, am I in the right place? I was like, I don't think you are, Jim. It's like, and they started walking off. He said, to be honest, this seems like I prefer to be in this room. It seems like a better vibe. Like, I think you're probably right, Jim. I think you'd enjoy it.
True story.
But all fun and games. Well, yeah, really grateful for your time. Even more so grateful because of the technical hiccups that we've had this morning. So really appreciate it, mate. And
yeah, no worries
as well.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And for anyone watching, like, running a business, you can have loads of fuck ups, and you just got to keep cracking on, aren't you? Like starting a podcast and recording a mega podcast, and then getting to the end and realizing you haven't hit record. So
no one would do that.
No one would ever do that. What a fucking stupid mistake. But really, really appreciate your time, John, and yeah, sharing your thoughts.
I'm just going to chip in before we finish as well to make sure we get this in there. Like, as I said at the start, John, you're someone I massively respect in business. Mentioned previously, look, worked with so many people in the recruitment industry, over 500 recruitment business owners over the years and stuff. And you're someone that I really respect. Always have done from a business perspective, but even like now we've got to know each other more recently, like certainly on a personal perspective, and naturally that shone through before as well. So as a mentor, I don't think new business owners, new recruitment business owners, maybe even leaders within recruitment businesses could go much further. Yeah, couldn't go wrong with reaching out to you. And I know we've had this discussion that you're happy for people to do that and all the rest of it as well. So where would those type of guys find you, John?
Yeah, 100%. And what we've said before, like I've increasingly started to do some coaching, particularly with people that managing new teams or growing sort of smaller recruitment businesses. So yeah, either easy to find on LinkedIn, John Smith at the Accountancy Recruitment Group, or again, if they want to reach out to you two guys at Unbound, and I'm sure you guys can sort of nudge in the my direction if that works for you.
Yeah, love it. Well, it's not going to be Googling. I was just thinking then, yeah, just Google John Smith, you'll find it. So.
Best of luck with that. Yeah. They can't even find me in my gym. There's about 10 of us.
Quality, mate. Well, yeah, great to catch up. We won't keep you any longer because we've had enough of your time this morning, and we'll catch up on the check-in tonight, pal.
Perfect, mate. I'll see you both later.
Legend.
See you, mate.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, John, your hero.